3 days ago, a commercial oil tanker broadcasting civilian transponder codes opened fire on a United States Navy destroyer in the Strait of Hormuz. The attack was not a hijacking. The tanker was not commandeered by hostile forces. It was purpose-built as a weapon platform, disguised as a commercial vessel, and operated by Iranian naval personnel from the moment it left port. The USS Porter, an Arleigh Burke-class guided missile destroyer, was conducting routine patrol operations approximately 30 kilometers from the Iranian coast. The ship's aegis radar system was tracking multiple surface contacts, as it always does in these congested waters. One of those contacts was a large tanker, approximately 250 meters in length, displaying an automatic identification system transponder signal, identifying it as a Liberian-flagged oil carrier en route to India. Its speed, course, and radar signature were consistent with a fully loaded commercial vessel. Nothing about it suggested a threat. At 14:22 local time, the tanker's cargo hatches opened. Within seconds, 12 C-802 anti-ship cruise missiles launched from concealed vertical launch cells inside what appeared to be standard cargo compartments. The missiles were already programmed with the Porter's position, transmitted from coastal radar sites. They accelerated to high subsonic speed, skimming less than 5 meters above the water's surface, using sea clutter to mask their approach from radar detection. The Porter's defensive systems reacted immediately. The Aegis combat system classified the incoming missiles as hostile, calculated intercept solutions, and began launching SM-2 standard missiles from the ship's forward vertical launch system. Simultaneously, the close-in weapon system, a radar-guided 20mm Gatling gun designed as the last line of defense, activated and began tracking the closest threats. 9 of the 12 missiles were destroyed before reaching the ship. The Aegis system performed as designed, engaging multiple targets simultaneously and maintaining a high intercept rate even under saturation attack conditions. But 3 missiles evaded the defenses. They struck the Porter's superstructure, penetrating the hull and detonating inside the ship. The explosions killed 14 sailors instantly and wounded 37 others. Fires broke out across multiple decks. The ship's radar arrays were damaged. Communication systems went offline. The Porter remained afloat, but it was no longer combat effective. The tanker that launched the attack did not attempt to flee. It continued on its original course, maintaining speed and transponder signal as if nothing had happened. By the time additional U.S. naval assets arrived in the area, the attacking vessel had blended back into the flow of commercial traffic transiting the strait. Without clear visual confirmation of which specific tanker had launched the missiles, and operating under rules of engagement that prohibited firing on vessels broadcasting civilian identification, the U.S. ships could not return fire. Intelligence analysis conducted in the hours following the attack confirmed what Pentagon planners had feared but hoped was not yet operational. Iran had converted a significant portion of its aging tanker fleet into covert missile platforms. Estimates suggested that at least 40 vessels had been modified. Each one appeared externally identical to a standard commercial oil tanker. But internally, cargo spaces had been reconfigured to house vertical launch systems capable of firing between 12 and 16 anti-ship missiles per vessel. The modification process was relatively simple. Older tankers, many of which were nearing the end of their operational lifespan and could be purchased for $5 to $10 million, were brought into Iranian shipyards. The cargo holds were fitted with containerized launch systems, similar to those used on modern warships but designed to be concealed. The missiles themselves were stored horizontally in sealed containers until launch, at which point automated systems would rotate them to vertical position, open the cargo hatches, and fire. The entire sequence from hatch opening to missile launch took less than 20 seconds. From a distance, these vessels were indistinguishable from legitimate commercial tankers. They displayed the same radar cross-section. They moved at the same speed. They broadcast standard AIS transponder data. Satellite imagery showed no obvious external modifications. The weapons were completely hidden until the moment of launch. This created an impossible problem for U.S. Navy commanders operating in the region. The Strait of Hormuz is one of the busiest maritime choke points in the world. On any given day, 50 or more large tankers transit the waterway, carrying oil from the Persian Gulf to markets in Asia, Europe, and beyond. Most of these vessels are legitimate commercial ships operated by international shipping companies, crewed by multinational sailors, and protected under international maritime law. But among those 50 tankers, an unknown number are Iranian weapons platforms. There is no reliable way to determine which is which until they open fire. AIS data can be spoofed. Radar signatures are identical. Visual inspection from aircraft or surface vessels provides no definitive identification unless the cargo holds are opened, which commercial operators will not do voluntarily and which international law does not permit naval forces to demand without probable cause. The rules of engagement governing U.S. military operations in international waters are explicit. Civilian vessels cannot be fired upon without clear evidence of hostile intent. A tanker displaying commercial transponder codes and traveling on a normal shipping route does not meet that threshold, even if intelligence suggests that a particular vessel might be an Iranian weapons platform. Suspicion alone is not sufficient justification for engagement. Iran understands this legal framework and is exploiting it strategically. By disguising military assets as civilian vessels, they create a scenario where U.S. commanders must choose between enforcing strict rules of engagement, which leaves them vulnerable to surprise attack, or adopting a more aggressive posture that risks sinking a legitimate commercial tanker and triggering an international incident. The tactical advantage of this approach is significant. A conventional Iranian warship can be detected and tracked from over 100 kilometers away. Its movements are predictable, its capabilities are known. U.S. naval forces can position themselves to maintain standoff distance and engage the threat before it closes to firing range. A tanker, by contrast, can approach within 30 kilometers before anyone realizes it is armed. That proximity compresses decision timelines dramatically. From the moment the cargo hatches open to missile impact is less than 90 seconds at close range. Defensive systems must react perfectly, with no time for human deliberation or verification. If the system misidentifies the threat or fails to intercept every missile in a saturation attack, the consequences are severe. The economic impact extends beyond direct military engagement. Global shipping insurers have responded to the threat by increasing premiums for vessels transiting the Strait of Hormuz. Rates have increased tenfold in some cases. Many shipping companies are now routing tankers around the Cape of Good Hope, adding thousands of kilometers and weeks of travel time to avoid the risk. This has reduced the volume of oil flowing through the strait by an estimated 40%, contributing to higher global energy prices and increased volatility in commodity markets. Iran's strategy is not designed to sink the entire U.S. Navy. It is designed to impose costs that are unsustainable over time. Every destroyer operating in the Gulf must now treat every large commercial vessel as a potential threat. That requires constant vigilance, frequent repositioning, and the expenditure of expensive interceptor missiles every time a weapons platform is identified and engaged. The cost asymmetry is brutal. Converting an old tanker into a missile platform costs approximately $30 million, including the purchase price, modifications, and missiles. A single arleigh Burke-class destroyer costs $1.8 billion. If one of Iran's 40 converted tankers manages to sink or mission kill a U.S. destroyer, Iran achieves a 60-to-1 return on investment. Even if the tanker is destroyed in the process, which is likely, the trade is favorable. U.S. intelligence agencies are working to identify every converted tanker in the Iranian fleet. Satellite reconnaissance is being used to monitor shipyards for signs of modification work. Human intelligence assets are attempting to gather information on crew assignments and operational schedules. Signals intelligence is monitoring communications between vessels and coastal command centers. But even with perfect intelligence, the problem remains unsolved. Knowing which tankers are armed does not eliminate the legal and tactical constraints that prevent preemptive engagement. Alternative approaches are being considered. Could U.S. submarines track suspected weapons platforms and sink them covertly? Legally questionable and diplomatically explosive. Could cyber operations disable the launch systems before they fire? Technically challenging and unreliable. Could naval forces establish an exclusion zone around U.S. ships and engage any vessel that enters without authorization? A violation of international maritime law and likely to provoke confrontation with legitimate commercial shipping. The precedent for this kind of warfare exists. During the Iran-Iraq War in the 1980s, both nations conducted what became known as the Tanker War, attacking commercial vessels in the Persian Gulf to disrupt each other's oil exports. Iranian forces used small boats and disguised platforms to launch attacks on tankers, forcing international naval forces to escort convoys and increasing the risk of miscalculation. In 1988, the USS Vincennes, operating in a high-threat environment and under intense pressure, mistakenly identified an Iranian civilian airliner as a hostile aircraft and shot it down, killing all 290 people aboard. That incident remains a source of national trauma in Iran and a cautionary example of what happens when military forces operate under ambiguous rules of engagement in crowded, contested environments. Iran is now deliberately recreating those conditions, knowing that the psychological and political pressure on U.S. commanders increases the likelihood of errors. The converted tankers are distributed throughout the Persian Gulf, the Gulf of Oman, and the approaches to the Strait of Hormuz. They move constantly, blending into commercial traffic, repositioning to maintain coverage of key choke points and naval operating areas. Some are anchored in Iranian ports, ready to sortie on short notice. Others are underway, mixed among legitimate shipping, waiting for targeting data from coastal radar sites. U.S. Navy destroyers and cruisers operating in the region now maintain a constant defensive posture. Crews are at elevated alert levels around the clock. Weapon systems are kept hot. Lookouts scan the horizon for any vessel that deviates from expected behavior. The strain on personnel is significant. Sleep schedules are disrupted. Stress levels are high. Fatigue accumulates. The operational tempo is unsustainable over extended periods. Meanwhile, Iran continues to produce C-802 missiles and install them on additional tankers. The conversion process takes approximately 6 months per vessel. With multiple shipyards working simultaneously, Iran can add several new weapons platforms to the fleet each year. The program is expanding, not contracting. The Ghost Navy is not a temporary tactic. It is a strategic capability designed to hold U.S. naval forces at risk indefinitely. As long as these weapons platforms exist, every commercial tanker in the region is a potential threat. Every transit of the Strait of Hormuz is a calculated gamble. And every U.S. warship operating in the Gulf is exposed to an attack method that exploits the seams between military necessity and legal constraint. 3 days ago, one of those tankers opened fire. 14 U.S. sailors died. The ship that killed them is still out there, somewhere among the dozens of tankers moving through the strait today. It looks like all the others. It moves like all the others. And until it fires again, there is no legal justification to stop it. The U.S. Navy owns the seas, but it cannot sink what it cannot identify. And in the crowded waters of the Persian Gulf, Iran has turned 40 oil tankers into invisible warships.